March 2013, an airfield in Moscow. A Chinese plane rolls to a stop, the door opens, and the man everyone came to photograph steps out. Xi Jinping, brand new president of China, on his first trip abroad. And then the cameras do something they weren't supposed to do. They drift past him to the woman coming down the stairs behind him. A teal coat, a silk scarf, a leather handbag held just so. By the next morning, she's on front pages from London to Tokyo. Not the president, her. The shops back home sell out of her coat within days. And somewhere in Beijing, someone in the leadership is watching this happen and feeling something that is not pride. Because the woman stealing the world's attention from the most powerful man in China isn't a movie star, or a model, or a rival. She's his wife, and she was famous long before he was anyone at all. Her name is Peng Liyuan. The people who study Chinese politics will tell you she's the most beloved public figure in the country. A few of them will tell you something stranger, that in a system built entirely on image, the woman who controls the image holds a kind of power the man with the titles never quite managed to. Here's a part that's hard to get your head around. When these two met, she was a celebrity, he was the nobody. This is a story of how that flipped and why the flip had to happen. Subscribe and turn on notifications before we get into it. Trust me, you'll want the next one too. Start in 1962, a small county in Shandong province. Not money, not connections. Her mother sang in a local opera troupe. Her father ran a county culture house. So the first language Peng ever learned wasn't really Mandarin, it was performance. And she was frighteningly good at it. Not talented for her age, good enough that at 14, a provincial arts university let her in, years ahead of every classmate in the building. Sit with that. Most kids that age are worried about homework. She was already training for a stage that would one day hold 800 million people. At 18, she does something that sounds bizarre to Western ears. She joins the army, not as a soldier, as a singer. This is a part outsiders never understand about China. The military doesn't just field troops, it fields its own performers, its own celebrities, its own stars. And Peng climbs that ladder for years until she holds a rank most generals would recognize, the civilian equivalent of a major general, a two-star singer. Both of those things true at once. That's going to be a theme with her. Then comes a stage that makes her, the Spring Festival Gala. If you've ever seen it, picture this, one broadcast on New Year's Eve, watched by more human beings than any program on earth. Hundreds of millions of families in the same hour, in the same country. At 21, Peng walks out onto it, and she doesn't leave. Year after year, she's back, singing the patriotic anthems. An entire generation falls asleep humming. They give her a nickname, the Peony Fairy. By the late 1980s, if you stopped a stranger anywhere in China, they knew her face. Now hold that fact in one hand, because in the other, I'm about to put a man almost nobody had heard of. Friends set up an introduction. She's 24, a household name. He's 34, divorced, a deputy mayor in a coastal city called Xiamen. Ambitious, sure, but a long way from the center of power. And here's a detail that survives in every telling. He didn't know who she was, barely watched television. So instead of fawning over the famous singer in front of him, he asked her technical questions about how she sang. She read it as intelligence. He read it as decided. He later said it took him about 40 minutes to make his mind up to marry her. A year later, quietly, away from cameras, they did. Remember the score at this point. She is a star. He carries her bags, metaphorically speaking. Nobody watching would have bet a single yuan that he'd end up the more famous of the two. There's an interview from 1999 that reads, in hindsight, like a prophecy. Peng is asked what kind of man she'd always wanted. Her answer, someone successful, ambitious, a little domineering. The interviewer pushes, does her own husband fit that? By 1999, Xi had risen to become a provincial governor, a massive deal in politics, but still completely invisible compared to his superstar wife. Peng doesn't blink. Of course he's successful, she says. I've been married to him for over a decade. 13 years later, in 2012, Xi Jinping becomes the leader of China. She wasn't hoping. She was reporting the future early. So now go back to the Moscow airfield in 2013. To understand why her coat caused a quiet panic, you have to understand the rule she'd just broken. For decades, the wives of China's leaders were ghosts. They didn't travel, they didn't appear, they didn't have faces the public could picture. The role was to be invisible, and every first lady before Peng played it perfectly. Then Peng walked down those stairs, and the entire world looked at her instead. And both things were true at once. She was the most graceful soft power weapon China had ever deployed abroad, and she was a problem. The Los Angeles Times put it plainly that year. The president may run the country, the paper said, but his wife's the real star. In 2014, Forbes ranked her the 57th most powerful woman in the world, a first lady with no office, no portfolio, no vote, reigned. At home, it went further than fame. People started calling her Peng Mama, Mama Peng, the mother of the nation. Every outfit she wore got dissected on social media within the hour. Shops sold First Lady-style coats by the truckload. When she stood next to her husband, the cameras still drifted. But in a country where the leadership controls almost everything, there was one thing it suddenly couldn't control: who the public loved more. Before long, the party apparatus quietly stepped in. The viral Mama Peng music videos and internet memes were scrubbed. The state-backed idolization was dialed back. Because China's political culture has an unwritten law older than the party itself. A wife does not outshine her husband. And the more the country fell for Peng, the louder that law got. So watch what happens. The most famous singer in the country stops singing. No new songs. Public appearances thinned out, scheduled tighter, controlled. The peony fairy, the woman who owned the biggest stage on earth for 30 years, was effectively asked to turn her own volume down so that her husband's light wouldn't have to compete with hers. Think about how strange that is. She didn't fall, she didn't fail. She was dimmed on purpose, punished, in a sense, for being loved too much. But you don't spend a lifetime learning to command a crowd and then just go quiet. Peng changed the kind of power she used. She became a goodwill ambassador for the World Health Organization, attaching her enormous name to the fight against tuberculosis and HIV, a UNESCO special envoy for girls' education, the graceful, human face of China abroad. Analysts have a term for exactly this: soft power, the ability to make people feel something about a country that no speech and no missile ever could. Officially, she has none of the hard kind. She's not on the Politburo, the small room where China's real decisions get made. She holds no government post. By the rulebook, the power is zero. And yet, here's a thing the rulebook can't measure. A great performer knows something most politicians spend their whole careers failing to learn: how to reach people's hearts instead of just their heads, how to make a stranger feel loyal. Peng spent 40 years perfecting that exact skill in front of the largest audiences in human history. Her husband commands the army, the party, the state. He controls what people are allowed to do. But Peng may quietly hold a thing that's harder to win and impossible to seize by force: what over 1 billion people actually feel. That's the case for the strange claim we started with. Not that she signs the laws, but that in a system that runs on image, the woman the country loves may be standing closer to real power than the rulebook will ever admit. The men in that small room seem to think so too. Why else would they have worked so hard to turn her down? And there's a quiet trap in it for her. The same culture that adored her is the one that clipped her wings the moment she got too bright. She can't go back to being the singer. That role's gone. She can't push into politics. That door's bolted. She's left in a narrow space, beloved enough to matter, careful enough to survive. All that influence in a lid kept firmly on top of it. So look at the whole distance. A culture-house daughter from a small county in Shandong, a 14-year-old prodigy, a 2-star singer the whole country knew before her husband knew her name. The peony fairy who became Mama Peng and then got quietly asked to whisper. Walk it all the way back to the teal coat on the Moscow airfield, the cameras drifting off the president and onto her, and you understand the moment differently now. That wasn't a fashion story. That was a precise instant China realized its first lady might be more powerful than it was comfortable with. So I'll put the question to you: is Peng Liyuan more powerful than the president himself? or just the most loved face of his rule? Tell me below, because I genuinely think it splits both ways. But here's the thing, Peng played the game carefully. She read the rule, and she bent. The last time a Chinese leader's wife refused to bend, the last time one reached openly for real power, it ended with her on trial for her life, and a country that turned on her overnight. Her name was Jiang Qing, Madame Mao, and that story is far darker than this one. That's the next one. Subscribe so you don't miss it.